Welcome to Christian Statesman. I'm your host, Zach Wagner, and this is episode 54. Who really wants to take the guns? A new session of Congress meets, and all sorts of agendas are flowing. One of the key areas of focus is gun legislation. Few of us have forgotten the promises, or threats if you prefer, from Kamala Harris stating that if Congress did not do something about assault weapons, so-called, she would act by executive fiat within 100 days. The Second Amendment is pretty clear on the whole gun ownership issue, identifying it as a natural or God-given right. So why do we have so many of our politicians determined to repeatedly violate this constitutional right so frequently and frivolously? Who is really after the guns? An easy answer is that activist groups such as Mothers Against Guns or the Brady Group are the motivating forces behind such legislation. It may be true that for public relation purposes these entities are trotted out and given voice, but the real movers of this agenda lay beyond the borders of America. The agenda is driven by foreign interests, particularly the United Nations, undoubtedly with heavy input from China. The deep dive into their doings reveals a very anti-American, anti-Constitution agenda. In 2010, the United Nations created a document outlining their priorities for the next decade. This document outlined human rights problems and violations that needed to be addressed over the next decade. Along with genocide in Africa and other atrocities occurring across the globe, gun ownership in America was the fourth or fifth item on the UN's list. The verbiage identified the propensity of firearms among American citizens as an imminent human rights danger, both to our nation and all nations, that needed to be remedied as soon as possible. Let us reflect on this proposition for a moment. Our Constitution outlines specifically the right to bear arms as a God-given or natural right. It portends every person has a right to defend themselves and their property. In a rational world, that makes perfect sense. The UN is fundamentally stating that such a concept is in fact a violation of basic human rights, not an extension of natural rights. This is far worse than much of the debate we have in America today about whether gun ownership is a right or privilege. This diatribe takes the discussion to a whole new level. If we look around the world, much of the civilized world has already been essentially disarmed. Europe, Asia, and Australia are gone. No one in France can march on their capital with an AR or FNFAL strapped over their shoulder, even if their intentions were peaceful. Australia and New Zealand have been stripped of their rights by their own leadership with nary a whimper. And now we have tools like Sheila Jackson Lee introducing onerous legislation such as H.R. 127, setting the stage for eventual confiscation here in the U.S. Fortunately, we still have a Constitution, or what is left of it, and we have a few patriots left like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who seeks to actually represent her constituents in forwarding opposing legislation in the upcoming Gun Owner Privacy Act. Further, we have several states declaring themselves Second Amendment sanctuary states who will refuse to enforce any legislation that directly contradicts the Second Amendment. It is clear that this is on its way to becoming a watershed issue among our legislators and citizens alike. We need to be reminded by history of the last century that wherever guns have been confiscated, eventual genocide followed. Disarming a population has little to do with safety. It is not about the children or the welfare of underprivileged citizens, even though the rhetoric may so claim. It is about control, pure and simple. It is about strengthening government and a burgeoning police state, giving citizenry no alternative to dictatorial impositions of power. We must not forget that in the last century there were more people eliminated by their own governments than by all of the wars combined. And that really takes some doing. This scene repeated itself in Germany, Russia, China, Cambodia, Cuba, Venezuela, and elsewhere. In each case, the citizenry was disarmed in the name of safety prior to overreaching actions by their own governments upon their citizenry. Here in America, Biden and the Democrats are talking about disarming millions of citizens of several classes of weapons while simultaneously describing Trump supporters as domestic terrorists who may need to be subject to special police action and even, quote, re-education camps, unquote. This is a dangerous and volatile mixture of rhetorical irresponsibility that does little to encourage half the country that their rights are being watched over by our leadership. If you want to spark civil resistance, even potentially violent backlash, try taking guns away from freedom-loving Americans. It is a sure formula for unrest and confrontation. But it need not be so. To solve this situation, we need to dislodge all legislators who, either wittingly or not, are representing foreign agendas over truly American agendas. Unfortunately, that is almost all of the Democrat Party at the moment, and plenty of Republicans as well. Unfortunately, Americans seem ill-informed of the real agenda or who is driving it. Heaven help us all if the gun grabbers prevail. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends, and as always, have a blessed day.